Well, hello, Hingham third graders. My name's Janice McPhillips, and I am here at the Education Garden at Holly Hill Farm in Cohasset. I hope you've been here before. Maybe you came here on a field trip. Maybe you came to camp. Maybe you've just come for a visit. We're an organic farm in Cohasset, and we visit the schools. People who I work with and myself visit the 4 elementary schools in Hingham to do work in your school gardens. And since we can't be there this fall, we thought we would bring a lesson from the farm to you. So today we're going to talk about seed saving. So hopefully you all remember that when a plant grows, it starts and ends its life cycle as a seed. And I have many examples here to share with you. Here's something that maybe you've seen in your garden and maybe you've tasted. These are some kale seeds, seed pods. These are seeds from a kale plant that grew in a garden. The kale grew and then it made a flower, and a bee visited the flower, and the flower turned into a seed pod. So let's take a look and see the seeds from this kale plant. Can you see those tiny little black seeds coming out of that seed pod? I also have something that you might recognize, still looking a little bit like itself. This is a little baby sunflower. So the sunflower's season is really gone by, and they're not quite as big and beautiful as they were, but they've left behind something to make sure that the process of growing sunflowers can continue from year to year. And that something is hiding behind the flowers. All I have to do is break the sunflower head open, and you can see many little tiny black sunflower seeds. If I plant those, not right now, it's October. I wouldn't want to plant them now in October, but if I plant them next spring, I can grow some more sunflowers. I also have a very large seed that comes from a tree that grows right here next to where I'm sitting. It's a black walnut tree. Now this is the seed pod of a black walnut. They fell down off of the tree a couple of weeks ago. When they first fell, they were bright green, and they've been sitting out here in the rain for a couple of weeks. And so they've gotten kind of old, and they're starting to decompose. But the walnut inside of this coating is here, and sometimes we find them, they've been cracked open because the squirrels love them. And you can see the nut inside the coat. Now I could open this up and eat it, but in nature what happens is these seeds, if they find a fertile piece of ground to grow in, they might turn into another black walnut tree. Maybe you've seen that because you've seen acorns that fall on the ground. Those turn into oak trees, and these would turn into a black walnut tree. And there are many other seeds out there this time of year. Here's an example of something that blows all over the place. This is something I hope you know and have seen. That is a milkweed pod. This is the seed pod of the milkweed. And the reason why these spread all over the place is because the seeds, which are the little brown things, see that brown thing hanging down? It almost looks like a tick. If any of you have ever had a tick on you, maybe you recognize that, but it's not a tick. This is a seed, and it has a little parachute attached to the top of it. And that parachute is what helps it fly all over the place to find a new place to grow next year. Amazing. Now, to Native Americans, seeds were very precious commodities. They didn't have grocery stores, there was no Stop and Shop, no fruit center, no Big Y. So they kept careful track of the seeds that they grew, and they made sure not to eat everything, because if they ate all of the fruits that they grew in their garden, then they wouldn't have any seeds to plant the next year. So seeds were very precious. It was the key to life. They had to farm those seeds year after year, and if they didn't, if they weren't successful at it, then they would perish. So today we're going to talk about a 3 sisters garden. It's a very special companion planting technique that Native Americans used to plant 3 kinds of plants together in a way that helped each other grow, helped each of those individual plants grow in a way that was better than if they grew individually. It's a very clever technique. Let's take a look. So here we are at a 3 sisters garden in the education garden at Holly Hill Farm. We set these up last spring in May, and as you can see, they've been marked with a very nice sign. So let's read what the sign says. Three Sisters Garden, corn, beans, and squash. I'll let you read that. Awesome. Well, as you can see, these have been protected by some sort of mesh netting to keep the critters out, because chipmunks and squirrels would love to eat what's growing in a Three Sisters garden. So the three sisters that grow together as a companion planting are corn. And Sister Corn has a job. Her job is to grow tall and straight. And the second sister is Sister Bean. Here's an example of the beans growing on the corn. Just like Jack and the Beanstalk, those beans would twine around the corn as it grew taller and taller. And here are some beans. These are some purple beans that grew. Here's the third of the three sisters. This is Sister Squash. And Sister Squash's job is to make these big leaves. This leaf is sort of decomposing, as you can tell, but when it was a full leaf, it was a big, big leaf. And the job of a big leaf like that is to keep the soil, to sort of make an umbrella, to keep the soil moist, to make sure that any moisture that fell didn't evaporate. If you keep an umbrella over your head, it keeps rain off your head, but on a sunny, hot day, it keeps the sun off your head. And if the soil is moist from a rain, covered by a big leaf like this, it prevents the rain, the moisture in the soil from evaporating. Very important job that Sister Squash did. So each of these plants grew something to eat. Sister Corn obviously grew corn. Sister Bean grew beans to eat, and Sister Squash grew squash. So let's take a look at those. Here's a squash hanging right on the vine. Look at that. This is a type of squash. Looks like a pumpkin. Here are a number of other kinds of squash. They didn't grow on this particular plant, but this is an example of a different kind of a winter squash called a delicata squash. This could have grown as part of a Three Sisters garden. This is one I hope you know. This is a really delicious squash called a butternut. Also a winter kind of a squash. Not because it grows in winter, but because it can be harvested now in the fall and saved until winter. Has a nice tough exterior. And in the inside, maybe you've seen it, there are seeds inside there. Here's an example of a winter squash. This is called a spaghetti squash. This could be the kind of squash that would grow in a Three Sisters garden, and I just wanted to show you what's inside. I've cut this in half, and I'm going to put it on my cutting board here, and look what's inside. What the Native Americans would have done with these seeds, of course, they might have eaten some of them, but really they would have been very sure to save them. They would dry them and store them in a safe place over the winter so that the chipmunks and the squirrels didn't get them. And then next year they would take these seeds and they would plant them. And here are some examples of the corn that might have grown in a Three Sisters garden. They're not really the kind of corn that you would eat like corn on the cob. They're really meant to be a popping corn, or the kind of corn that you would grind and make into cornmeal. I want to show you a close-up of these 4 different ears of corn. This is the corn that grew on the Three Sisters garden here. You can see the different shapes and sizes of the kernels, very small. These are much, much larger. Here are some beans that I saved. These are dried out. Those purple ones that we saw earlier, those were still what we call snap beans. They would have been soft and tender and delicious to eat. But this is what it looks like when you take beans and you let them sit on the vine until they dry out. And we call these shelling beans. And you can see there's beans inside that pod. Now again, you could eat those. This could be baked beans, or it could be beans and rice, or any number of ways to eat beans, refried beans. But again, those Native Americans, they knew that if they wanted to eat again from year to year, they needed to save their seeds. So these beans, some of them would be food, and some of them would be saved as seeds. Another important job of Sister Bean Besides doing the job of climbing up, winding around that tall stalk of corn, these beans have an amazing, amazing ability to actually send nutrients from their roots into the soil to make the soil more fertile and nutritious for the corn and the beans and the squash to grow. They are what's called nitrogen fixers. They can actually take the nitrogen from the air and put it into the soil so that the corn that needs the nitrogen for its growth can have it. That's an amazing way that this bean sister was able to help sister corn and sister squash. 3 plants that grow together in a way that helps each of them grow. The beans grow up. The beans will twine around the tall, straight stalk of the corn, and the squash will provide an umbrella to keep the soil moist. They work together to help those 3 plants grow and be very productive for the Native Americans who needed to eat this food to survive. So that's the story of a 3 sisters garden. Maybe you'll get to plant one sometime in the future. I hope so. And maybe we'll have one in your school garden next spring. Bye. Thanks for watching.